I'm here with Carlos Jimenez,
Jimenez.
and we're talking about his journey of faith so far. And to start, Carlos, could you tell us, first of all, what your background is in Christianity, or if you were associated with other religions before Christianity? What was your religious background growing up?
None, basically.
Zero.
Yeah, zero. I come from a Catholic sort of belt, Central America, Nicaragua. I was born in Managua. But yeah, basically zero, nothing.
Okay. So at what point did you encounter Christianity and start investigating these subjects?
Oh, investigating them? 3 years ago.
3 years ago. And what happened that worked that, why did you start doing that?
Well, what happened was I was going through a tough personal period in my life. Nothing made sense. Life sort of became off color. All the things that I used to enjoy doing didn't bring me any pleasure, any peace of mind. So this thing was just something internal that happened in me. It wasn't any external thing. I was single, no kids. Yeah.
So on the subject of Christology and who is God and related to the Trinity, what was your exposure as far as that goes? I mean, it sounds like you were an atheist with some sort of Catholic familiarity.
Yeah. Well, my first contact with Christianity was in my teens. I was 18 or 19 when I moved to Australia, Sydney, from California, and my family had gone from Catholic to Pentecostal.
It's kind of a shift.
Yeah, so they started, they started preaching to me, things like, Jesus loves you, God loves you, and things like that, the general things you hear in traditional churches, but I didn't really pay any heed. I was into science books. I was into evolution. I thought we one day blew up and, we're drifting away and came from monkeys. So I accepted what my teachers at school, at high school, junior high in America taught me and what they continued to teach me in Australia.
Okay.
So I accepted that as truth of where we came from and all those sort of questions.
And then what happened next?
I just went through my teen years, my young adult years, just basically ignoring it. Sometimes I would hear Jesus and, come to church and things like that, but I really didn't have any interest in it. And then just like I said, 3 years ago, this I don't even know what to call it, but just an internal thing. No one was preaching to me. I was alone, actually. I had a full-time job. Like I said, I was single, no kids. Nothing really external to cause this. The best thing I can relate it to is depression. Although I've never been a depression sort of guy. Thank God I never had an illness of depression. I hear that's an illness. So
yeah.
So basically 3 years ago, that was it. And I started thinking, I have to get out of this because it felt really awful. You get suicidal, thoughts sometimes and things like that, things I never thought about.
Uh-huh.
So I started reaching out. And my brother, my oldest brother, my one and only brother, blood brother, he had become a Christian, and we went through a very tough time with him because he was into drugs and, failed relationship. So he had become a Christian. He was somewhere else, not living with me. And I heard about that, but...
Did you see a big change in his life?
Well, no, I wasn't with him. He was in another state, in another place, basically. I just heard about it, and I said, that's good for him. Now, I didn't really have any love for my brother at that stage because he had caused... I lived through most of it because I lived with my parents most of the time. Mm-hmm. So I just said, fine, but when this thing came on, he had been a Christian for about a year. And I just heard good stories, right? He changed his life. He's not being self-destructive. So I reached out, and he was there. Mm-hmm. We talked on the phone a lot of times, and I heard the change. And I heard him
You
say,
could sense it even just in the way he talked. And
yeah, I mean, when you suddenly start talking about deep things and God,
right.
I mean, we weren't brought up anything. In my family, at dinner table, there was no God. There was no. So who did you help today, right? Who did you evangelize or who did you preach to? There wasn't anything like that. So when he starts talking to me, evangelizing me basically, that was weird. That was weird. So and the weird thing was that it helped. It helped, and
it kind of took you by surprise.
Yeah. So I could sense the love, right?
And this is when you were in that time of depression?
Yes.
Okay.
So this was over the phone. So I decided to go where he was, which is Sydney, in another part of Australia. I was in Brisbane, Queensland. So I started to go and meet with him and my other family in Sydney. And so they talked to me, and they only referred me to the Bible. They only said things like, it might be God speaking to you. No, I didn't know God. Right, I was basically an agnostic, not really an atheist.
Just more of a secular person,
yes.
A non-religious person.
Non-religious person, non-believer. So they only referred me to the Bible and God and all these things. So, when you're in that situation, I guess, in need of something, I guess you prick up your ears, as they say, and
right.
and listen and
well,
really
you needed something.
Yeah, you pay attention. It's like you're bleeding and you need something to stop the bleeding.
Yeah.
Or else you're going to die. So I started listening. So I did that a couple of times. I flew back and forth from Brisbane to Sydney a couple of times. And then I finally said to myself, I'm still bleeding, right? It was helping what they were saying. They were, but I made a conscious decision to seek God. So seek the God that these people were telling me about. Seek the God that my brother was telling me about. So I left everything. I left my job. I was 10 years in the security industry. I left it. I left everything. And I remember I just packed, I guess, my sleeping stuff in the car and left for Sydney. And keep going. And I arrived in Sydney, I guess, seeking for God, quote unquote. Mm-hmm. And so that was my beginning into my Christian life, I guess.
And so you had an experience in which your depression lessened, or how did the depression get dealt with in this? It seems like you were on a journey. You even relocated. You're desperate to do whatever you needed to do in order to get the healing you needed. Mm-hmm. So how did that work out?
It was still a struggle. Mm-hmm. It was still a matter of reading the Bible, and it was a matter of searching. So when I get to Sydney, I probably 3 or 4 months of the same thing, right? But what happened was, I mean, it's hard to remember, right, these things, and especially me, I don't have a good memory, but I think when it finally sort of went away was when I had made a conscious effort or choice to seek God, but I didn't really take the step of, or what we call leap of faith in my personal life in terms of committing myself to a personal relationship with God.
Right.
So it was hard for me intellectually. Thank God I haven't had any vices like drugs or alcohol, things like that. So it was hard in the aspect of my intellect, right? Because I'm a very logical person, right? Common sense person. So that was my struggle in those months in Sydney, in making the leap of faith to a commitment to an invisible God, right? The whole thing was very alien to me, right? What am I actually committing to? I don't know this personal God, right? He's invisible. I can't hear him. Right. So it was an intellectual thing, more so. So, but the day came, I guess. And it's funny because now that I think about it, I made a conscious choice to seek God. I relocated, but I didn't really.
You hadn't committed yourself.
Yeah,
yet.
within myself, I hadn't really accepted the reality of a personal God.
Okay.
So that came like 3 months into it in Sydney when I started going to church, and I started hearing very good messages, right, about commitment and about leap of faith sort of messages, and about how, for example, the path of a Christian is really for people that are strong and not people that are weak.
Right.
So
Right.
that was attractive to me in a way. It was a challenge, right? And so I took the leap of faith, as we call it, one day in church service. So after the service, I remember that it was Mother's Day. I remember that because we had our small group in Sydney had a Mother's Day thing at church. And they always, after the preaching, used to do the call. Is that what you call
Altar
it?
call.
Altar call, yeah.
Yeah.
And I knew it was only for me because I was the only basically non-Christian
Right.
there.
Right.
So, but it's funny because when I woke up that morning, I didn't know they were doing this whole thing at church. And I said that day, I said, okay, today I'll accept the altar call.
Oh.
But they didn't make it because they had this Mother's Day thing.
Oh.
So I said, man, that's interesting. So I remember I heard the message, very good message, and they didn't do the altar call. And I sat there for a minute and said, oh, maybe, why should I even do it?
Right.
Right? Why should I ask for prayer? Which is what the altar call, as far as I know, is all about. And so I sat there and I went, why should, right? But it's like that little voice that said, no, you said you were going to do it.
Right. You
And
got to do it. Yeah.
So I went up and I talked to the pastor and I said, I'd like to commit myself to this faith, whatever it is. I'd like to commit myself to to accepting the personal God. So we prayed, I guess you call it the sinner's prayer or something.
Sinner's prayer. Yep.
Sinner's prayer. Yeah, and it was good. I felt good. I was very emotional. I cried a little bit. So it was good. And then so that felt good. So I thought, okay, I'm part of the club. So, and then the following service, so I'm sitting there in the following service. I'm a committed Christian, right? So I'm sitting there and the altar call comes up again. And I guess, I don't know why, maybe someone visiting or something. And I'm sitting there thinking, cool, like I can cruise, right? I'm part of the club. I can, but something told me to go up and ask for prayer again. So I go up again. I don't even remember, honestly, why. I get up, and when I got up there, I just felt really small, really sort of emotional. And so I sat down and I started crying. I cried for minutes on end. And I remember the pastor came up and he put his hand on me and said, what do you need prayer for? And I couldn't even speak. And it was just like a laundromat inside of me, just like cleaning, I don't know, like cleaning all this stuff. And I just felt in the presence of something very powerful.
Right.
And and after that, it was that I actually felt like a new person. I actually felt I couldn't wear the things I used to wear. I wore a lot of worldly, sort
like
of
what kind of
get
stuff?
up, like, these shirts, these skeletal, what I guess you might call evil stuff, and some profanity stuff, things like that. So I wrote.
Suddenly you felt uncomfortable in your old
I
clothes.
felt uncomfortable in my own clothes. I had to change the way I looked, and I felt very uncomfortable with all the sort of junk that I had collected through the years.
Like what kind of stuff?
Hobbies, like I used to watch a lot of movies,
Uh-huh.
a lot of DVDs, a lot of books, a lot of literature, which really, was very worldly, what we call worldly. So, yeah, I felt different, and I I thought I have to concentrate on God and His will and His purpose for me, and keep seeking Him. So it wasn't a matter of, okay, now I believe in God and I'll stop there. But yeah, something told me to go further. So that's what I did. I got rid of all my old self, I guess, as the Bible says. And yeah, it was like a new birth.
Wow. So when did this issue of who is God and who is Jesus, when did that issue come up in your own journey? I guess it would be after you had this experience and after you had committed yourself to following after Jesus as your Lord.
Mm.
What brought that on?
Well, first thing about this is that I believed in a single God.
Okay.
So when I accepted the personal God, it was one God. It was, that was my understanding at the time.
Uh-huh.
This feels like I'm in sort of court or something. As a witness to.
Yeah.
So what? There were 2 or 3 guys.
Yeah.
No, there was one guy.
Right. Sure. So you had never been exposed to the complex idea that someone could be one and also 3 in a mysterious way.
No.
That had never occurred to you.
No.
And you had been reading the Bible.
Yes. No one sort of indoctrinated me. Mm-hmm. No one sort of said, okay, now you accepted God and Jesus and we'll teach you what this is all about. No. What happened was I was told to read the Bible. I asked, obviously, so where do I start? I remember they told me to start at Gospel of John.
Okay.
I do remember that. So I read John, but I sort of made a conscious effort to get to know Jesus, because I had in my altar call, I had accepted Jesus as Lord,
right,
and Christ.
Right. So now you have to figure out what that means.
Yeah. Who is Jesus?
Mm-hmm.
Right. I don't know who Jesus is.
Right.
I take it upon faith that this man was the Son of God. So I figured, well, I got a bit of historian's mind. I did a bit of history.
You studied ancient history,
yes,
right?
Yes, ancient history, okay. Antiquities, medieval stuff. So I said the best way to get to know a historical figure is to read his biography. And the closest that came to mind was the 4 Gospels,
right,
that talk about the life and teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. Mm. So I took it really as a sort of research, historical research. So I started reading the Gospels. And pretty quickly I came to a realization that, fine, so we're dealing with a historical individual, right, who was born in a point of time in history, right? There are many witnesses to this event, so to this person's life and story. And this person did a lot of things that were miraculous, or signs, as Gospel of John says, that he did in order to prove who he was. And that was the promised Messiah of Old Testament prophecies. So I don't really remember when I came to be exposed to the Trinity, but it probably happened in my research of Christian history, early Christian history, because I was probably looking into it because of wanting to study it, to be a teacher of my faith. Mm-hmm. So I probably came upon the Trinity there, and when I came upon it, I did a research of what Trinity actually was, what it meant. And when I came to read about it, and this whole, it's really a philosophical doctrine.
Right.
That's what it sounded like to me. So what I did was I asked my pastor, I asked my family, those Christians that were there before me, how they saw it, if they saw it the same, if we saw it the same way, because I saw one God, right, and I saw one man, Jesus of Nazareth. I couldn't see 3 persons. I couldn't understand the concept of 3 in 1,
or God-man,
or God-man, or double nature.
Double nature.
That was very hard.
Right.
I mean, and you got to understand, I didn't dismiss it because I don't know any better.
Right. It wasn't like you had an agenda.
Yeah.
You're just innocently probing the subject, trying to figure out what does the Bible teach on this.
And how this Trinity developed right?
Right.
So yeah, exactly. I don't have a personal vendetta or agenda,
Right.
because I don't know any better. I just want to check the facts,
Mm-hmm.
like legally speaking, and see what the truth is. Because really, nobody wants to live in error,
No.
So, so I checked the facts, and they
What do they say when you ask them about it?
Oh yeah. So my family, I asked my pastor, and I told him, how do you see it? Do you believe in that God is a Trinity or a triune or whatever person? And he says no. I said good, and I go, so there's one God? And he says yes. And I said, okay, Jesus is a human being, right? He's not God man, or no, he's the Son of God. And I thought, beauty, right? Good.
Right. No problem.
No problem.
Right.
So,
Makes sense. It worked.
Yeah.
It worked well with what you were already reading in the Bible.
Yes.
So
It sort of aligned,
right.
right? It harmonized with them. So I guess looking back now, I was lucky in that respect that I landed in a group of people who were really at heart Unitarians.
Right.
So I was no problem. So then I decided to go back to my teaching degree, finish my teaching degree, and obviously teach about my faith.
Mm-hmm.
So the next obvious step was to go to some type of theology college.
Okay.
So I told everyone about it, to get some feedback, and they said, "Yeah, great."
Now, what was your goal, to be a teacher?
Yeah, Christian, a teacher of theology at
Okay.
a Christian institution.
Right. So you had been in the security industry.
Yeah, for 10
and
years.
then you did this Christian thing.
Yeah.
You started becoming a Christian.
Yes.
And so you said, well, I'd like to go become a teacher of theology. So the logical step is I need to go to college. And what kind of college? Well, a Christian college, right?
Well, duh, right? I mean, I'm not going to go to a mosque or
right.
something like that.
So what happened when you started applying to Christian colleges?
Well, at this point, I guess I'm not fully aware of the denominational problems in our faith, right? Because if you're Catholic, you go to obviously a Catholic college. If you're Baptist, you go to a Baptist. I'm not fully aware of that.
Right. You're just starting out. You're coming into this fresh.
Yes.
Okay.
So, but pretty quickly I become aware of the denominational divides
Right.
Within our faith. So I find very quickly that most institutions where I come from in Sydney, Australia, theological colleges, you apart from filling out forms, a lot of forms, you have to sign what they call a statement of faith
in order to apply
to get into a degree or a subject. So statement of faith, confessions of faith, however you call it, they're creeds, right? And most of them, if not all of them, are the Nicaea Creed, what we call the Nicaea Creed. So one God in three, and the double nature, and all that sort of stuff, right?
Right.
So the points of faith, right? So we believe in one God, and we believe in one Jesus, God of God, very God of God, and stuff like that.
Right.
That is very anti-biblical. It's not
extra
biblical.
biblical. Yeah,
Extra biblical. Yeah.
It's not anything that sounds like the Bible you were reading.
Exactly. It doesn't sound like Matthew. It certainly doesn't sound like what Jesus said.
Right.
So I had a problem with that. So I kept digging. I finally find 2 theological colleges that don't require the signing of statements of faith.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment on that statement of faith thing. I think this is something we come across a lot in evangelical scholarship, in scholarship of Christians who are believers, is that since they require this creedal, this acceptance of the creeds at the outset, before you start doing research, you're limited in your research to never contradict those creeds. So you know ahead of time what you have to believe.
Right.
It's not an option. You have to believe it, or you have to go somewhere else.
That's right.
Now you're going to start your research at the college level, or
within
and now
those parameters.
In your research, you have to continue saying what you already agreed to.
Yeah.
So really, your research is a circular exercise where you know what you are supposed to believe. You do the historical research. You play the game, so to speak, and you're going to end up confirming what you already started with because you have to.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's a real shortcoming of evangelical scholarship, is that they're always doing research to confirm rather than research to explore.
Circular.
Whereas in any other discipline at the college level, especially as a research professor, once you get to that level, you're supposed to do things that haven't been done before. You know what I mean?
I guess. I thought that's what we did.
You thought that's what college is all about, right? Is learning new things, challenging old things, and testing things out to see if they're really true. You know?
Yeah.
So what happened once you realized all these colleges required a statement of faith that you couldn't sign? What'd you do then?
Like I said, I found two. To come back to it, that didn't.
Oh, good.
Didn't have that requirement. Yet they still had the paperwork. I had to fill out so many things, and even get photos taken of myself. I don't know what for. Maybe to put on their wall when they rejected you or something. I don't know. But
that's terrible.
but so I do it. Right, I do it.
You jump through all the hoops. You sign all the forms. You dot all the I's, cross all the T's.
Except the creedal statements, which they apparently didn't have. They're non-denominational, right?
Oh, okay.
So the colleges, I don't know if I should mention it. But
I don't think we need to mention the name specifically.
So it's in Sydney anyway. One of the prestigious ones, so-called. So I do it. I jump, like she said, the hoops. And then I have to go through an interview process. So I get in there. It's like a job application. It's ridiculous. So I get in there. I sat with the principal of the institute and another professor. So there we are, and they're going through all my paperwork, my essays, and all this. And they're asking me things like, so how long you been a Christian? Why do you want to study? What's your goal? What are you doing in church? And things like that. So, and somewhere along the line, I think it was the principal who said something about God dying on the cross. Okay? So, I mean, and again, I repeat, I don't know how bad the situation is if you speak against it, but I couldn't help myself. So I said, something like, what do you mean? Sorry, God died on the cross. And I said something like, but the Bible doesn't teach that God dies, does it? So I questioned it. I questioned that, and
the Bible actually teaches God is immortal.
Yeah,
1 Timothy 1:17.
That's what I thought.
Yeah,
right?
Which means he can't die.
So I made a series of, first I think it was questions, right? And there were very probing questions regarding what those statements that I just heard, extra biblical, like you said, and the whole tone and spirit of the interview changed. The guys became, they stopped talking, and they just listened to me. I sort of told them how I saw it, and their face changed. Their expressions changed. It was very funny. I was laughing inside actually, and so then after I said my piece, they looked at each other and said, "Look, we haven't heard this before." This is what they actually said. "We haven't heard this before. We're going to have to talk about it. Can you please wait outside?" So I wait outside like an hour.
An hour?
About an hour, seriously. I was looking at because I'm sitting there in the foyer or the office, whatever. And I'm looking at the clock, and it was taking an hour at least. And I thought these guys left, They sort of, I was left there.
Who makes you wait? I mean, that's just incredible.
I don't know what they were doing. Now looking back,
maybe they went to get lunch. Came back.
I think now that maybe they even did it on purpose. I don't even know. Anyways, the principal comes out. Just the principal comes out. This huge fella. I remember very vividly. It was the size of a door frame.
Okay.
He comes out. I'm only like 5'7" myself. So he comes out, and he takes me outside of the office to be alone. So we're outside, and he starts telling me, "Look, we're going to have to put your application through the board of review because we've never heard this before. We've never encountered someone like you. And he said things like, we represent a Christian community, and it would be a dishonor to accept someone like you into our institution. It would be like accepting, I remember he said 3 groups. Mm-hmm. He said it'd be like accepting fornicators, homosexuals, or blasphemers into our institution.
Now, why did he say that to you?
Why?
Because you didn't believe in the Trinity?
Yeah, basically because they hadn't heard a Unitarian basic understanding of the Bible.
So non-Trinitarians are the same as homosexuals, fornicators,
and blasphemers. Yeah.
Wow.
That's what he said to me. And I'm a year in.
Right.
And I don't know how to react really. I was like shocked. I was like, wow.
I think the old you might have reacted.
Yeah, I would have knocked him out probably.
If somebody called me a blasphemer or fornicator.
Yeah, I mean, I would have. Oh, yeah, I would have.
Be hard to take.
I don't care how big he was.
Yeah. But Christ had already begun to do something in your heart, so you didn't punch him. Did you?
I tell you what, when you hear this thing, when you hear something like my story, even when I hear it now, you get very angry.
Right.
When you hear it.
Right.
But
it's upsetting.
I guess when you live it, and maybe what helped me was I was young in the faith. I don't know what, but I felt sorry for this man,
him.
For him. Oh. I felt like
compassion.
I thought to myself, if Jesus comes this day, right, or later tonight, this guy's gone.
Right. He's in trouble.
He's basically closing the door to someone who wants to still learn about their faith, despite the differences. And I also thought things like, why are these people so against me? What am I doing wrong? So it was a very sort of down sort of feeling. I didn't really get very agitated, which is good, I guess, in hindsight.
Yeah, but I think also you didn't know it was coming. This was all taking you by surprise.
Caught me off guard, but still, I would have punched him back in the day.
In the old days, right? It's funny, as you were telling the story, I was just remembering back to a time when I also had an experience very similar to that, except I already knew going into it that our people have been burned at the stake for hundreds of years.
I didn't know any of that.
You weren't familiar with that history at that time, but I was when I had my experience. I live in an area in upstate New York where there aren't any seminaries. There aren't any places to study Bible at the graduate level. And I went to a satellite school of a well-known theological seminary that's based in the South or the Midwest, well, one of those states down there. And they have a satellite extension up here in the same town I live. So I was very excited to check it out. And I went in, and essentially my question is, do I have to sign a statement of faith in order to apply? Very similar question, except I already knew going in that, it's not a good chance. And I went in there and I was able to immediately get an appointment with the dean of the college and sort of like the principal type person, and sat in his office, and he's asking me questions, and I'm able to answer his questions, and I'm asking him questions about the curriculum and so on, and then I'm just like, well, let's see if I can get this out and see how he responds. I say, well, I don't really necessarily believe all the things that your denomination teaches. He's like, oh, really? What in particular? I said, I don't really believe dead people are alive in heaven. I think they're asleep until the resurrection. I figured that would be an easy one to start with,
Right.
And he's just like, well, that's all right. If you believe that, so long. I mean, how do you feel about the Bible, Sean? I said, well, yeah, I believe the Bible is inspired. I believe it's true, authoritative. He said, oh, okay, yeah, we're okay with that. And I said, well, there's one other thing. See, I don't really believe that the Nicene Creed, it really solved the the question of who Jesus is very well. He said, "What?" He just, like the blood drained from the face.
That's exactly what happened.
all of a sudden he stops calling me brother,
Yeah.
and being so loving to me. And he says, "What? You don't believe that Jesus is God in the flesh?" I said, "Well, I believe he's the Son of God in the flesh. Is that okay to be just that biblical and not say Jesus is God in the flesh? He's the Word made flesh, the Word of God made flesh, and so on." And so he asked me some questions, and I answered them, and I said to him, "Is there a place for me in this college? This is a graduate school, teaching theology and so on. Can I come here?" And the response is just the same. "Well, we would have to put your application through the board of directors down in this other state where the main campus is," which is not, I don't think, that unusual, but he said you would have to attach a separate sheet of paper describing your beliefs about Jesus and God and so on. And essentially the answer was, "No, you shouldn't apply here. But you can if you want, but you're not going to get in."
Oh, okay.
kind of a statement. So I guess I had it easier than you had it. I was not called a blasphemer for holding to the sound doctrine of the Bible or anything like that. But so what happened for you next after you were, I guess, rejected?
Yeah, the story doesn't really end there because it's still going, actually. Because what happens is, so I go back to a secular university, or at least I thought it was a secular, just a normal university, and they have a thing called a Bachelor of Christian Studies. And they're really, as far as I know, in Australia wide, the only university offering such a system. So the what we call the student advisor there sort of pointed me to, I told her what happened, and she was like dumbstruck. She was like, "What?" And she said, "Well, we can offer you this." And I said, "Good." So no prejudice, no, right? So that's what I've been doing for the last 2 years. But it just so happens that this degree is what they call a cross-institutional degree, where you do theological components and secular components. So, your career paths are opened up a little bit more. But the interesting thing is that at this particular degree, I'm getting persecuted as well. And the funny thing is that I'm getting persecuted on the non-secular part of the degree. So
now, when you say you're getting persecuted, what do you mean by that?
Well, example, I've gotten failed twice on essay papers without really no explanation.
Well, they didn't put on the paper a note or anything like that explaining?
One of the first one they failed me on, actually, the professor actually wrote, the first thing he wrote was well written.
Okay.
And so he wrote other stuff, but he went well written work and so on, but it doesn't fully answer the essay question F. And I actually and I put that paper, that was my first failed paper, and that was a secular subject paper, and I actually put it for an appeal to get it reviewed.
Right.
And it got knocked back. Now, I was very angry at this point, and I actually called the professor, and to see because my big thing was, these guys are failing me, and they're really not telling me where I'm going wrong,
right?
So I can improve.
Yeah, how can you even fix the problem?
Exactly. So I call them up for, I thought, specifically that point. I accepted it. What else am I going to do? But at least I want feedback.
Right.
I don't want to keep.
You don't want to have another F next time.
Because these subjects, you're talking $700-800 a subject. They're very expensive. Nobody likes theology, so they jack up the price, right? So I call them up, and I remember, I said, "Look, I need some feedback. I accept the F, but basically, what is the problem?" And he basically said, "Well, I enjoyed reading your paper a lot."
Okay.
That's what he said.
He started by saying that.
That's what he said, and I shouldn't have called him looking back on it because I got angry, more angry. And he said, I really enjoy reading your paper, but it really wasn't answering the set question. That's it.
Now, what was the question? Do you remember?
Simple one. It was, we had to watch any movie,
Okay.
and do basically a film review with and talk about Christian themes
Okay.
that the movie may have had,
Mm-hmm.
and themes like salvation, redemption, things that we looked at in that class.
Sure. Now, what film did you watch?
I watched Superman Returns.
Okay.
The Bryan Singer one, the remake. It wasn't a remake. And I actually on that paper actually made the connection between how the movie had Trinitarian concepts within it. I didn't really attack the Trinity. I didn't really make any sort of theological heavy-loaded arguments in the thing. So that's what really struck me about it. But that's the sort of feedback I got. And the second paper, I got failed on the same thing. And I didn't really bother with that one. I didn't put it to a review or appeal. I just thought, I'm getting persecuted here. And why? Because the first one that they failed me on, when they rejected my appeal, they actually sent me a little booklet from the university saying theological bias in the classroom. And inside you get like examples of when to appeal cases. And one of them was actually on the Trinity. Something like if you're a student in a class and the Trinity subject comes up and you question it, the professor can't be biased against
Really?
it. And that was actually in that book. So I just said, fine, I'm getting persecuted here. And it just to finish it up, it just so happens that these two failed papers thus far my professors have also been pastors. So the first guy who failed me was a so-called pastor in the Anglican church in Sydney. And the second is a so-called reverend in the I think it's Anglican or evangelical church. So yeah, that's really my story thus far.
Thus far, right. So in your investigation at the college level, you're probably continuing to look into the subject of who is Jesus, who is God, why are all these Christians around me believing in this Trinity when it's not in the Bible? I mean, is that one of the issues that you've investigated at school?
Well, my last semester at uni, I actually took up a course called Jesus, Person, Politics, and Ethics.
Okay.
In the secular part of the degree, thinking that here I'm going to get an objective historical view of Jesus in his Jewish context. And I thought, beautiful, right? We're going to get an objective dialogue going.
Right.
I'm going to be dealing with, at least historically, like-minded individuals. And in that particular subject, I did an actual paper on the divinity of Jesus, what it meant in the Second Temple period. And again, I researched that paper to bits. I try to be as
meticulous.
Meticulous. Sometimes I get so many footnotes I have to scale down. And the sort of comments I got passed, but with a really low grade. And the sort of things I come upon is that, for example, and this paper is interesting, and the reason I mention it because the marker, the person who marked it, actually confessed that the research I had done on that paper, he agreed that Jesus and the New Testament writers were Unitarians.
Okay.
Or are Unitarians.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that the Chalcedonian Creed is wrong.
Right.
So to me, that's an actual...
Yes, it does. The Chalcedonian Creed talks about how Jesus is God and man, who the natures are not, confused and so on. So if they're Unitarians, then that is a contradiction. If they don't believe Jesus is God, then he's not God and man, right?
Exactly.
So that's just a factual error on his part.
Well, that's the sort of thing I'm dealing with now. I mean, so in terms of this year coming, God willing, I'll probably just stay away from the theological loaded stuff and just try to get by. I mean, this is my last year, I hope, if I don't keep getting failed. And like my father says, just get the piece of paper, because people, they don't look at your face, they look at your papers.
Right.
What you've done, what you've accomplished in institutions. So that's
well, I mean, it's just a very disturbing story of places that are supposed to be pro-research and, I would hope not stubborn against new ideas. I mean, that's what colleges are for, is to help us to ask the hard questions. And, apparently when you ask questions,
you get in trouble.
In these days, you rather than getting rewarded for that and saying, "Oh, good job thinking on your own," they're saying, "Who told you could think on your own?"
Yeah.
F. You know what I mean? So, I mean, that's very disturbing. Yeah. But would you say, just to close out, what would you say is the biggest thing that convinces you that the Trinity is false?
Well, the forces working against sound doctrine. Mm-hmm. I mean, a guy I read recently called Sebastian Castellion. He was a reformer age guy, and he wrote against Servetus burning at the stake by orders of Calvin. Mm-hmm. And I remember that now, especially because in one of his statements objecting to the burning, he said that basically, and this guy was Trinitarian, Castellion. So he was he wasn't a person that was outside of he was coming out of the Catholic inner Protestant. And Calvin actually disdained, he had a very harsh disdain for this guy, disliked him because this guy basically was smarter than Calvin. Right. And Calvin was jealous of that. But that's another story. But I always remember part of his quote said things like, what Paul calls sound doctrine is not really what the Protestant movement is doing. Right. Especially in light of Servetus, the Servetus affair, as some history books put. Right. So, yeah, basically, just the forces working against us, I guess. The sort of poisonous, sort of harsh, sort of violent people sometimes you meet. Right. And the lack of dialogue, not only at a sort of pew, what we call pew level, like, street person level, but the lack of and not wanting to engage in dialogue at the scholarly level. Mm-hmm. That just baffles me. Right. That someone, especially in a secular institute, cannot engage with you regarding the Trinity. Yeah. Yeah, they just won't touch it.
I think that's sort of evidence in itself that they know they cannot win if the dialogue is fair and rational. And
I mean, if it's biblical.
Right.
So if you stick to Bible, they can't hack it. They can't cope with it. Right. And they shrink back. And, yeah.
So the only way to then deal with people like you who are going to ask these questions and not just accept what is accepted by other people, actually asking questions about it, what they have to do is intimidate you. And they have to marginalize you because they know they can't just defeat you in discourse. They cannot change your mind there, and they cannot prove their point there, so they move to the fear tactics. Now, thank God we live in a time where it's not anymore popular to burn people at the stake, because that's what they used to do to Unitarians, or drown them in the river, or cut their heads off if the authorities caught you. So maybe we should be thankful for that, but at the same time, when you're putting good money into a secular secular university, you should not be getting sort of the witch trial, effect from these people who are saying, well, you don't agree with us on this, therefore we're going to fail you, even though you did it, a good amount of research and it was well written. We still fail you because you're not in the boys' club. You're not a Trinitarian. So
well, really, I just want to say that really, all I seek is honest, scholarly discourse at this time.
You sound like Servetus.
I mean,
that's all he wanted, right? And he got burned by John.
That's all I want. I don't want people to just attack me and say, you're crazy, see you later. I want them to, look, even when I sit down, and I love talking about the Trinity, I don't, I try not to be offensive. I just want people to, maybe even I think I'm open to it, but just explain it to me in a biblical way, in a way that makes sense.
And even just asking that will be very intimidating because they know they can't do that.
And I'm all ears. So
Right.
that's what I'm saying still to this day.
Right.
I'm still all ears, and I'm willing to spend time and effort with you, even though they're not willing to do it. And
All right.
that's all.
So if somebody listening to this wants to challenge you and say, Carlos, I'm so sorry to hear of your experience in Australia. That's absolutely terrible. But the Bible does teach a Trinity, and here are all the reasons why. Do you give them permission to email you with their comments?
Bring it on.
Okay.
I mean, let's get some honest
Dialogue, right?
common sense, non-offensive dialogue.
Right.
Because at this time, I'm dealing with so-called professors, doctors of theology, who don't want to. I mean, I got told recently by one of my professors that you're saying intimidation. He's saying I intimidate people.
Right.
I mean, it's incredible
Because
that
when you're in class, you yell and carry on and
no,
scream. No, you don't do that, right?
Because
So-
you probe, because you ask, because you want to know the truth. And it's interesting that me, a 3-year-old Christian, I'm no one.
Right.
I don't claim to be any reservoir of wisdom, but I'm just a person seeking the truth.
Right.
Because when the day comes, right, the day of the Lord, as the Bible calls it, the
Right.
day of wrath, some
Right.
prophets call it, nobody, I repeat, wants to live in error. Because at this point in the game, if you want to see it as a game, although I don't see it as a game, but this game is a life and death game,
Right.
right? So we don't want to be wrong about this.
Right. This is a serious issue.
This is a serious issue. It's
Right.
not about who's right or who's wrong. It's about
Salvation.
let's come as so-called Christians that we are. I don't care if you're Catholic, Mormon, JW, whatever, but let's come in that so-called Christian spirit and work out our differences, because really we're in the same boat. You see what I'm saying? This isn't, a game where you're going to like shoot once, miss, and you're going to be able to shoot again. Right? I mean, this is serious stuff.
Right,
So
this is
that's
serious,
all.
yeah.
That's all I'm asking.
Yeah. But I think you are intimidating because it's like the story of the naked emperor, or the emperor's new clothes, where these deceiving people come in and they tell the emperor they've got these invisible clothes, and or they don't say they're invisible. They have these beautiful clothes, and the emperor's really naked. He's riding through the town, and everybody is saying, "Oh, your clothes are so nice," but he's really naked. And the kid says, "The emperor has no clothes on," and everybody in the town is like, "Oh, how could you? What audacity?" But meanwhile, the emperor really is naked. And so that's intimidating to those in power, to those in a position of authority, because their greatest fear is that the emperor is naked. All their senses tell them the emperor is naked, but they know they have to believe he has clothes on. And here's you, the 3-year-old Christian, come along saying, "But he's naked, isn't he?" I mean, let's define clothing here. Clothing is something that is opaque and covers the body and is made of a substance. Let's go poke the emperor and see if I can touch his skin or if there's an invisible barrier. And they're saying, "How could you ask such a question? Take it on faith. It's a mystery. It's not supposed to be understood. It's supposed to be believed." and you're saying, how do I believe something I don't understand?
Yeah.
And then again, back to the same thing.
I'd just like also to say that to those listening, anyone listening around the world, hopefully, we hope this reaches as many people as God is willing, and God knows who He reaches.
Right.
But I just like to say to people listening that, don't pity us either. I mean, I'm not telling my story so people go, oh my God,
poor Carlos.
We're gonna send them $5 or.
But if you would like to send money to Carlos, he probably won't turn you down.
But my story is just one of, thousands, hundreds of thousands of stories, and other people we don't even yet know about, probably. Not only in this age, but in ages gone past, of fellow brothers and sisters that have been persecuted to the extent of death, unfortunately. But yeah, I'm telling my story more that just to get it into people's head that, I hear a lot about the fear and the intimidation of so-called Christian leaders, where they tell their people, their congregation, not to question God. And I don't think at all that God hates a questioning person. He doesn't. I mean, why can't we question God? You see what I mean?
Well, I mean,
now,
the Bible's filled with examples of people asking good questions, even sometimes contradicting God in a respectful way, like Abraham. What if there's 40? What if there's 30? What if there's 20 in Sodom?
But when I say that, I say, why can't we question the triune God? Mm-hmm. Right? Why can't we question the doctrine of three persons in one God, right? Without thinking we're going to go to hell.
Right.
Or without being intimidated into a corner.
Right. We should be able to question it, and if it's true, there's nothing to fear.
It has to be proved.
Right.
It's, exactly. You took my motto. I live by that simple motto or slogan. Truth has nothing to fear.
Right.
You said anyone, want to challenge me or whatever. It's not that I like fighting or debates or things like that. But look, let's face it. We're in a war.
Right.
We're in a spiritual war.
Right.
Paul says we don't war like the world wars.
Weapons are not carnal.
I'm not going to pick up a chair and smash it against you because you don't agree with me.
Thank you.
I want spiritual wars in terms of dialogue.
Right.
Right? You test my truths against your truths.
Right. That's
all. And I think that's honest, and I think that is godly.
All right. Well, thanks for talking with us today, and I hope that this recording can help people to see that this is serious and to see that we should not be afraid to question things.
Amen.
And we hope that God blesses us to His own glory.
Amen.